Hey guys, yeah, time for another story time. And this week's story time is brought to you by all the talk on, on my channel lately about bush fever or cabin fever or whatever you want to call it, because of my antics on there. So we're going to discuss bush fever a little bit. I think everybody's heard of it. I'm back, when I was young on the trap line with my friends, we used to describe it as somebody went bushy, and that was that didn't mean they had a big beard. That was, strictly they'd spent too much time alone, and they went kind of goofy. And now, we've heard the tales of people just getting out of their cabin and just wandering off into the bush and never to be seen from again, stuff like that. But I think the most, people are social animals to a point, some more so than others. Now, when I was young, I was described most of the time as extremely introverted, which is why this whole YouTube thing is so bizarre to me, that I do this. But I still, I love being by myself. I don't I don't really have too many, if any, friends that I hang. Well, I don't have any that I hang out with. My brother-in-law, when we're during deer season and stuff like that, then the hunters. There's so many people around me all the time. I guess on my personal time, I just like to be by myself. Like I said, with the lodge in the summertime, there's always people around. The restaurant that I run, always people around. But you go back to my younger days when I was in the bush for 8-9 weeks at a time by myself. And I know you've all heard me talk about Joe Cool, but Joe's partner, well, not partner so much as, I guess he was kind of his, Joe kind of took care of me. He was an older fella, Orville, what is his name, and he Joe let him stay out at his cabin with him, his camp, and he helped him trap, and Joe, basically, took care of him. He was an older fella that just, didn't have anybody. Great old guy, just, give you the shirt off his back, and he literally did a couple times give me, like one time I stopped there on the way back, and I stopped at the cabin, and him and Joe were there, and he didn't think I was dressed warm enough. And I had on what I always wear, like I have now, a pair of long underwear and a pair of loose work pants. That's all I've ever worn in the bush. But he forced me. He just wouldn't let me leave until I took some clothes. He gave me a pair of dress pants that he had spare laying around the cabin, and so just to get him quiet, I put them on and wore them out of the bush. And then when I got to town, I totally forgot that I even had them on. So, I drove down to White River from Hornpain where my truck was parked, and when I got there, it was kind of late, so I went in the bar, and Bill and all them were, and they said they seen me walk in with this pair of dress pants, and they thought I'd gone bushy. Until, I explained that no, it was Orville had really made me take these things just and out of, just to make him happy, I took them. But now Orville was somebody who had spent a lot of time in the bush alone, and he was literally, he was bushy. He didn't have cabin fever per se, where it was, he was just, he'd gone a little goofy. Like I said, though, nicest guy in the world, but he Joe and him went out at Christmas one year, and you know, they went into town for Christmas, and then Joe was gonna stay in town for New Year's with his family, and Joe didn't have a family, so, you know, Joe said, well, Orville, you know, you can head out to the camp and just, you know, get the cabin warmed up and keep it warmed up, keep it going until I get there, and then we'll run out and check the lines. So Orville went out there, and like, you know, 20-mile train trip and then 6 miles in the bush. And so he went in, and New Year's Eve, Joe gets a call from the police. This is quite late at night, and they have Orville, and you know, they found a train crew found him wandering down the train tracks. Just he didn't have a coat on, he didn't have boots on, he just had socks, and they picked him up and brought him into town. You know, he had severe frostbite, and you know, Joe went to see him at the hospital, and he was like, Joe, he said, I was cooking supper and the cabin blew up, the propane stove just blew up. He said, it's the whole cabin's gone. He says, I'm sorry, I don't, you know, I barely made it out of there. I walked to the train tracks, you know, I didn't have my coat, didn't have my boots, nothing. And you know, Joe was obviously kind of freaked out, because this cabin's not a trapping cabin. This is his flying fishing lodge, the main camp of it that he, you know, it was his business. Now, Joe's plane was put away for the winter, so he contacted the guys at Horn Air, that's the air service out of Horn Payne. And, you know, they had a plane on skis, so he hired Terry, what the heck was Terry's last name? I can't remember, but Terry, that was the son of the owner, hired, you know, and they got in the plane and went to fly out to the cabin, and halfway out they had engine failure and had to land on a little tiny lake and spend the night. And the next day, you know, they were missing, so Terry's dad came out looking for him, and, you know, found him pretty quick, because they were on a beeline from the air service to the camp, so he just followed the track. Found him, blah, 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 picked him up. They fly over to Joe's camp, you know, and they're circling the camp, and, you know, everything looks normal. Was, you know, so they landed on the lake and went up, and there's the camp, the front door wide open, the back door wide open, Orville's supper sitting on the table on a plate, and they're like, what the hell, you know. Anyways, Joe goes back to town and goes to see Orville, and he's like, Orville, why'd you tell me the camp blew up? He said, everything's still there, there's nothing wrong. And Orville's response was just, I'm sorry, Joe, things like this happen to me all the time. But, you know, that's a little mixture of just, you know, too many years in the bush and having an episode of cabin fever while you're out there. And, you know, just to take off out of the cabin at, you know, 30, 40 below and walk 6 miles and through this, like, I mean, they had a really good trail, mind you. They, you know, had a well-packed trail out to the thing, but still, that's a, you know, a couple-hour walk with no, I don't think he didn't have boots, he had slippers on. Slippers he wore in the, but anyways, you know, and my only, I guess, episode with cabin fever, I had lots of, you know, nights sitting out in the bush where you're 20 miles from the nearest, well, up in Horn Payne, I was 23 miles from the train tracks, but basically 43 miles from the nearest person. Because I was where I hit the train tracks, I was 20 miles from Horn Payne from there. And I know you guys aren't going to believe this next statement because of a couple of the last videos I put out, but I am probably the sanest person I've ever known. You know, I might be a little goofy at times, but I am quite possibly the most sane person I know, and I could feel, sitting out there, I could feel it. It's like a huge pressure comes down on you. And, you know, and I could understand at the times how somebody who wasn't totally, you know, together would just, you know, basically lose it. You'd have an episode. You know, and the one that I did have was, it was, you know, there was issues at home. I wasn't married, this was just other stuff, and I was out in the bush, this is in Hiawatha, the long ways away, and I sat there. It was 10:30 at night. I think 40, the thermometer, 42 below. It was a brutally cold night, and I was getting ready for bed. I was sitting there, you know, having my last coffee of the night, just like this, and I was just going, man, I don't know. I gotta get out of here, or I am gonna go bushy. And once you say that, you know, afterwards, because what I did was, I got dressed, jumped on my snowmobile, 10:30 at night, middle of winter, 40 below, and drove 43 miles. Drove all the way into Hornpain, down the hit the tracks, then followed the Skidoo Trail all the way to Hornpain. When I got there, my knees were frozen solid, like the outside. I could not straighten my legs. My truck wouldn't start, obviously because it wasn't plugged in. It was sitting in the parking lot at the train station in Hornpain, and so, you know, I went into the train station to phone Bill to see if he could come and get me, but I'm, you know, now at this point it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, I got off the snowmobile at the truck, and I could not straighten my legs out. They were frozen into the position of sitting on the snowmobile. And I just remember the look on the guy's face, the caretaker, the ticket taker in the Hornpain train station, as the door opened, and I came crawling in on my hands and knees because I couldn't straighten my legs. Anyways, it ended up, Bill was in the bar, and obviously if he was been in the bar and it was almost 1 o'clock, he wasn't coming to give me a ride. So I sat in that chair, one of those little, most uncomfortable chairs on the planet, especially when you have frozen knees, and just sat there all night as my knees slowly thawed out, and I was able to sit, and boy, the pain of it. But I always wondered now, when I sat in my cabin and said to myself, I gotta get out of here or I'll go crazy. Now, by saying that and actually jumping on my snow machine, had I already, you know, hit the level of where you'd call it bush fever, you know, because that was an immensely stupid thing to do and immensely dangerous. But, you know, it's because, like I said, you hear all the time of people, well, all the time, the stories that you hear, you know, of people that wandered away from their cabin, just never to be found again. Nobody ever, you know, heard hide nor hair of them. They were just gone. Now that could have easily happened to Orville. He could have wandered off the Skidoo Trail, and you know, you get a snowstorm and he could have died half a mile off the Skidoo Trail and just never to be found again. You know, because there's a lot of bush up there where nobody would ever find you. And actually one native lady that lived in Hornpain, while I was there, she, you know, she took the train ride. She was a lady that had a trap line. Their family had a trap line up, and the train tracks went right through it. And, you know, she was late one day, you know, not coming back. So the next day they went out looking, and, you know, they found where she'd walked in to check some traps, and the police came in with dogs to track her and everything, and they tracked her down to the middle of a spruce bog, and then she was just gone. there was no trail no more, no nothing, nobody ever seen her again. You know, did she just backtrack, hop a train, you know, skip town? Who knows? But I mean, she had to walk out there and then walk straight back. Nobody on the train never found out anything about it, but she just, you know, she was gone, never to be seen again. And you know, it used to happen lots more than it does now, obviously, because I mean, there's not, you know, even those trap lines I had, like that Hiawatha trap line, you know, remote wilderness. But now I go on Google Earth and I look at that whole area, and it's just, the whole thing's just cut over. It's just roads all through it. It just makes me sad. You know, it's just not something you want to see. I mean, there's still lots of wilderness out there. You get way up into the Yukon and stuff. But even, you know, you look at stuff like, you know, some of the YouTube channels, and you know, and you know, I envy guys like Andrew Stanley. You know, that lifestyle. Although, you know, I made the decision when I was young that I wanted to have kids and grandkids, and everybody can see how special my grandkids are. But you know, that's a decision I made. I could have, you know, I spent 6 years living the ultimate lifestyle for a young guy that enjoys the outdoors, you know, fighting forest fires in the summertime, trapping all winter, living in the bush, just, you know, nothing could be better. But, you know, I made the decision to, you know, have kids, and I didn't think, you know, having kids and a wife and then being gone all the time was fair to my wife. So, you know, I did what I didn't want to do, but what I thought I should do, and fine. But like, get back to the point, like with Andrew Stanley, like you see some of his videos, and you know, he's following these trails and stuff like that, and you know, he's even up in Hay River in Northwest Territories, and some of these trails that he's following are obvious old roadways, you know, from, I imagine, logging, whatnot else, mining maybe, but you know, so even those, you know, the extreme wilderness up there is, you know, has got all that human encroachment on it. But, and don't get me wrong, it don't matter if there's roads there. It don't matter if the fact that I'm sitting here in my cabin, you know, 10 miles down the trail, when I know that it's only 5 miles in, well, any direction, north or east, west, you know, I'd have to go from here a good 15 miles to hit, no more than that even, to hit a road, more like 30, I guess. And south, I'd walk a real long ways before I actually hit a road. But still 5 miles, 50 miles, or a half a mile. If you're not careful when you're out here, you could be dead. And like I said, you know, guys that, especially when it gets into temperatures like, you know, 20, 30 below, you know, I think I mentioned it before, you know, you flip your snow machine and break your leg. And now, you know, breaking your leg in itself is not that, well, it's bad, but it's not that horrible. But where the problem is, I mean, if you go unconscious because of the pain, like you see a lot of people faint because of the pain of stuff. At 30 below and you faint, it can take you long before you're dead. And you know, so it's just be careful all the time, and watch what you're doing. But just on a side note, I got a when I guess one viewer was watching one of the cabin build videos, and I don't know if he was from Europe somewhere, from Quebec, but from the way he spoke English, it wasn't from English Canada anyways. And what he said was, "Nope, I'm never going in the bush with that man. He's too dangerous with the axe." And I got quite a kick out of that. You know, because, you know, for a lot of my life, I spent more time with an axe in my hand than I did without. I'm not sure what I did in the video. I didn't bother watching the video to find out what he thought I was doing dangerous, but I ain't never hurt myself with an axe. I shouldn't say that. My axe was sitting on my skinning table one day. This is on my Nimigus Lake trap line. It was sitting on there. I just finished sharpening it, and I forgot it was there. And I was skinning some marten, so I went to jump up, sit on the table to hold the marten between my knees to skin it. And when I went like this, my hand touched the axe and cut me for about an inch. That was my sole axe wounding experience. So. But anyway, yeah, cabin fever, bush fever, bushy, whatever you want to call it. You know, I know the Nimigus Lake trap line, that trap line was open because the trapper that was in there previous had died in his cabin. And it wasn't the cabin that I used. There was another cabin up there that he had stayed in. And, you know, I never did find out. Imagine it was a heart attack or something, but, you know, you don't know. I mean, he could have went cabin feverish and then just stopped, you know. He was just laying there in his bed, frozen when they found him. But, you know, he could have went cabin fever and just stopped doing whatever he needed to do to stay alive, and who knows. But I got a funny feeling that was just a heart attack. But, hey, like I said, nobody there to help you. And heart attacks, pretty serious situation. But anyway, my coffee's done, my story's done, and I am out of here. But I just got to show you. Oh, there's nothing like sitting in front of a nice warm fire, drinking a coffee, telling some stories. Later, Gators.